Glad to have you back for another edition of Daily Scone. And something I've mentioned is I love getting feedback. I love getting questions. So you can always email me your questions, mattmoscona@gmail.com. And whenever I get those, I love to respond to them. But I wanted to do something a little different today because one of the questions I got from one of our podcasts last week is actually from a guy that I used to work with. Whenever AFR went into syndication on KLRZ 100.3 ESPN New Orleans, our conduit there was Will Rabb. Will is no longer at KLRZ. He's now the sports director at WCDT AM in Winchester, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville. And I was thrilled that after one of the podcasts last week, I got an email from Will asking a question. So I said, hey, man, don't let me just answer the question. Why don't you come on and we'll have a little dialogue about it? So thrilled to have Will Rabb here with us. How are you, dude?
I'm doing great, Matt. It's good to get to talk to you again.
No, man, it's our pleasure. And you know what? I'll say this about Will, and it's one of those things that you can always – I don't know if you agree with this, Will, but in your career, I've certainly find like I'm always attracted to the people that are high on the give a damn meter. You know what I mean? Like people who could take any opportunity and, you know, like when we went into syndication on KLRZ – it would have been easy just to be a guy who was like flipping on your phone and pushing buttons whenever it needed to happen. But like the attention to detail to make sure that sounded awesome, like always stood out. So that was impressive. I don't know if you found the same thing in your career that you can identify people like that.
Well, it goes back to your Buzzy the Bee podcast. To be honest, if you're high on the give a damn meter, you're gonna get the opportunity. Guy who just shows up or the guy who just shows up and does the bare minimum doesn't. You have to stand out in this business.
So you've obviously done that, and as a young guy, you continue to scale and elevate in your career now. You know, in a management position as sports director at WCDT. But the question you sent me was, and I'll let you ask it however you want, but it was kind of about what you do outside as a sports show host outside of the fall. So if you would just kind of explain the question and the vantage point that you were coming from as you asked it.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the context is important a little bit. WCDT, small market radio station, and really old school radio. People nowadays probably aren't familiar with the concept of full service. But that's what we do, news on a local level, lots of local sports coverage, music mixed in with that. So really full-service radio. And the show I do is twice a week, 2 hours in the afternoon. And so from the day I started, I quickly realized, hey, you know, I don't have 15 hours a week. I have 4 to get across to people what I think is most important in sports. And so if I'm going to take the effort that it takes this time of year to find the topics that I want to talk about versus in the fall, okay, it's Tuesday, I got my show for 2 hours. The Tennessee Titans just played a football game. The University of Tennessee played a football game over the weekend. High school sports is really important for our audience. We have 2 high schools in the county that played a game on Friday. The show outlines itself. And so what I was wondering from your perspective is how do you approach a show for folks in Baton Rouge, hopefully in June or July because LSU just won the college.
Hey, man.
Yeah. Just the local teams are done, and there's always news about the local teams. But how do you lay out a show?
Yeah,
dog days of summer versus in the fall.
Right. So a couple of things. Number one, I personally recoil when I hear dog days of summer, slow time in sports.
I do too.
Because I know, and I know it's why you asked the question. But it's one of those things where I think there is always content, but like you mentioned in the fall, there are times where it's easy. Like you said, I mean, you come in on a Monday after, in my case, LSU or the Saints play, and in your case, the Titans and Tennessee Vols. Like, it's easy, right? I mean, that's spoon-fed content. You know walking in what your show is. So there are times in the summer months where the teams you cover aren't active, where maybe you got to dig a little bit deeper. But there is always something going on. And for me, and I don't know specifically if in Tennessee it's exactly like this, but I can tell you one of the reasons that I love South Louisiana, and really just Louisiana in general, is I look at the sports calendar and you go through football season, then baseball and LSU baseball and basketball and the Pelicans then overlap football season. And if LSU baseball is really good, obviously it'll carry you into June. And then by the time you get to the second week in July, you're at SEC football media days, then the Saints report for training camp, then a week later LSU reports for fall camp, and then you're in it. So depending on how deep of a run LSU baseball makes, you're actually covering live sports for your teams, until, like a year ago when LSU made the College World Series final, until the end of June. So really you just had 2 weeks before SEC football media days. Now, that's obviously a rarity, somewhat of an outlier. But I also say, man, for me, I always subscribe to the belief that you got to know your audience. It was like literally the very first day of Mass Comm school at LSU. I was in Mass Comm 2000, Dr. Jules Demacourt, and we had chalkboards then, dude. Like, we didn't even have whiteboards. It was like he wrote in big letters, "Know thy audience." He was like, "This is the number one rule in media." And so it's like, no matter what time of year it is, you got to know what's interesting to your audience on that given day. Like, and truthfully too, man, there's typically what you'll find in the off season months is that's when you end up getting a lot of sort of a lot of the off the field topics that are relevant. I don't necessarily mean just like if they're off the field issues, but for example, like one of the gigantic stories a few years back was realignment in college football.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, dude, that ate up like the whole summer was the talk about who was going where, and ultimately the SEC expanded, and that became a massive thing. So I think those topics are always there. If you're willing to dig and find them. So last year, for example, like what did you find yourself talking about during the summer months?
Well, I got lucky. I moved over to WCDT from another station in the area, and we delayed launching the show until SEC Media Days.
Okay.
And so I was able to jump in at SEC Media Days with coverage, and then I just borrowed an idea from a colleague in Nashville, or in Knoxville, that I worked with when I was first coming out of college, and I should say, interviewed anybody I could find that wanted to talk about any conference in college football and all the SEC schools. Well, because I knew that in Southern Tennessee, people are going to eat up anything college football. So
if college foot, and the other thing I would say, man, is keep an eye on the national sites and their college football pages. So like go to ESPN.com, go to NBCSports.com, go to CBS.com, go to SI. Like go to all the national sites and click on their college football page and see what newsworthy items they have. Like, for example, you'll always see, in June-ish, whenever the SEC or May goes for their spring meetings. And so that's whenever they get the big giant checks, and that's whenever rules changes for the coming year comes. So you know what I would say? It's like it's not that there aren't topics. I really think it's imperative on the host to make their audience care. Like, and I'll literally say this on air, Will. Like, I mean, there's times you've heard me say it. It's like I'll literally say, like if I don't care, then why should you care? Or like let me explain to you why you should care about this. Like I will literally set up topics like that. And if there's a topic about, like, let's say the Big Ten releases their revenue and its increase, and I'll say, like, you may be thinking, like, I'm in Tennessee or I'm in Louisiana. Why do I care about Big Ten revenue? And I'll say, well, like, let me explain to you why you should care about this. And then I'll go into my thesis about, well, hey, look, revenue generated affects college football, and look at the coaches that the Big Ten's been able to hire. If it's Urban Meyer or Jim Harbaugh or James Franklin. And it's in part because all these schools are getting richer, and if they're able to compete on that level, then of course they're building better facilities, hiring better coaches, they're recruiting the athletes that the SEC sort of had a monopoly on, and that's a threat to your throne as the SEC. So I mean, like, that's just one example, but I would always approach it with the mindset of, okay, if there's something that I find interesting, like, let me find the angle locally and just literally explain to my audience, like, this is why you should care. Because if your audience doesn't care, they're pushing the button.
Do you feel like in the summer you look for more guests to put on your show, or is it the same outline in terms of I'm just going to find what I think is interesting and give people my take on things?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So something that I'll find, in like, if there is a time in the summer months where I feel like I have a little more range, like you mentioned, if football season, you come in on a Monday and you're wall to wall what happened the weekend, right? You don't have a lot of freedom to ad lib. What I'll do is, like, throughout the course of the year, if I talk to people, like, I have a list, and I would literally recommend you or anybody do this. I have a list of people that I found interesting, and like, that I might have talked to throughout the year, and if there are angles that I might be able to approach with that person outside of the reason I talked to him. So I'll give you like a very specific example. So a few years back, I had Smiley Kaufman on the show. He played golf at LSU. He won a PGA Tour event, and I had him on the show after he won the tour event. And we were talking, for 10 minutes just specifically about that. But, as you start to peel back the layers of the interview, you find that this dude is just like the most obnoxious, diehard LSU fan. You just cut him and he bleeds emotionally for LSU sports. Well, that's a guy that if, during his season, I may only get him for 7 to 10 minutes to talk about his season and then maybe a kicker question about LSU, but is a super interesting guy that I'd probably really like to talk to long form, and I might have some freedom to do that in the summer. So, like, I would so highly recommend, if there are people that you chat with throughout the year that you're like, man, I would love to spend more time with that guy, or have that guy tell stories. There's scouts, I think, are great for this. Like, if you ever run into, like, MLB or NFL scouts, football scouts, and you can contact them and they have time during the summer, like, have them on for half an hour, for a couple of segments, or even an hour, and, like, have them tell stories about, I mean, you'll bump into guys that scouted, Derek Jeter when he was 17 years old, and they could tell you stories about that. And, that maybe that's interesting to your audience, maybe it's not, but then you find a relatable story like that for your audience. Maybe it's doing a recurring series like Legends of Tennessee football, and you line up each week to have a former Vol great on just to tell stories from his era. And maybe you do someone from the 2000s, someone from the 90s, someone from the 80s, someone from the 70s, and then there you go. You've got 4 weeks during the summer covered with that series. And then the other part about that too, Will, is then that can become a sellable feature. You can image it and bring it to your sales staff and say, hey, look, here's what I have. You think we can get a sponsor for this? And then you can actually make some money for the station too.
So again, I guess just at the end of the day, it's know the audience, figure out how to relate stuff, and just find interesting content. It's Radio 101, so it's not much different than what you do from the fall. It's just you got to go dig for it.
I think sometimes it literally is just that matter of, and it's like it's always there, man. Like like for example, a sports page. I mean, they've got to publish content no matter what time of year it is. Like I'll give you another example of something good to do during the summer. So, like, if you're tied in with the University of Tennessee, go find guys that played at Tennessee, played baseball at Tennessee, that are in the major leagues, or former Tennessee stars that are in the minors that are accessible. And that way you can like, they're playing, they're active, and you can continue to make that tie. Like, something I did a few years back was after Alex Bregman got drafted, I stayed in touch with him, and he was really interested in doing media, and he just, and so I gave him just a lot of tips about ways that I thought he could be better. And then when he was playing in the minors, he came on my show every week. So we did a weekly segment with Bregman every single week during his time in Corpus, and then he went out to Fresno. And I mean, he obviously just skyrocketed that summer through the minors, and then actually got his call up. But it was one of those things where, man, like, you had the number 2 pick in the draft, like A-list prospect, now a major league, star player, World Series champ, and was a beloved figure at LSU. And what it did was, people didn't necessarily care about the Corpus Christi Hooks, but people in Baton Rouge cared about Alex Bregman. I mean, he was a superstar player, and they had only heard him in sound bites on the news or on radio, whatever, throughout his career at LSU. And this was a chance for him to go a little more long form and let his personality show. And so many people just fell in love with the guy, not only the player. So, I mean, I would say, man, look at guys that were Tennessee baseball players, and see if you can find a way to get in touch with those guys and talk to them during the summer as well.
Do you ever feel that there's a subject going on in sports that's interesting, you want to work into the show, but it's a tough sell to your audience, and approach to doing that?
Do you have an example of something you've dealt with?
Well, I think once any sport gets to the postseason, I like to give it a little bit of attention. But in Southern Middle Tennessee, I don't know how interesting the NBA may be, or I really like ice hockey, but I don't want to bog the audience down with it. But, we have one of the best NHL teams on the planet, so they need a little bit of attention.
So here's what first and foremost, the show isn't about what you care about, and I hate to say it that way, but it's like I love the New York Yankees and I love MMA, and I rarely ever get to talk about either on my show because it's about it's again knowing your audience. Now, the interesting thing like the NBA playoffs, if you have a way to make it relevant to your audience in Tennessee, you do it. Like, again, if there's a Tennessee player or someone local who's playing in the playoffs or something like that, if there's a way to make it relevant for your audience, cool. Like with New Orleans this past year, the run the Pelicans went on, we got to talk a good bit about the playoffs for the first 2 rounds. But once the Pelicans were eliminated, it's gone. I mean, like, the only thing we're talking about now is what's going to happen with Boogie Cousins, theoretically. But actually breaking down the playoffs, like, there's no way that you or I could break down the NBA playoffs now better than the national guys because they have the resources to do it. And also then it's a matter of interest. So specifically, though, I'm glad you brought up Nashville, like the Predators, because I think we dealt with that similarly with the Pelicans, where it's a franchise, like, they had a really good year, but they're also trying to develop a foothold. Like, I don't know if the Predators, like, if you feel like because I just don't know the market as well, like, if they have their foothold, like, if people want to hear about them yet, or is it still just sort of an ancillary thing where maybe they have their base, but they don't have wide appeal?
I think it depends in Nashville if you're talking about sports talk, what station you listen to. Obviously, the flagship's going to give them attention, but I mean, people want to talk Predators,
Okay.
So it interests people. People want to hear about it. I don't want to drive away that guy who likes my show in a smaller town, but he doesn't get ice hockey, so he's gonna tune out if I do too much of that, I guess.
So then I think the challenge for you is back to what we talked about. Like, how do you make it interesting for that guy? And maybe it's not like breaking down the power play goal in the third quarter. It's finding it's like, if I live in the state of Tennessee, and this is what I had to do with the Pelicans, because just generally speaking, the franchise came to New Orleans in 2002. They've rebranded. They've not had a lot of success. So you've got your core group. They've got a superstar player, but it's been so hard for them to generate mass appeal. So when I get the question, like, why people say, man, who cares about the Pelicans? Well, I have to explain to them, and like, these are topics I'll do on the show, like, why you should care about the Pelicans, because it's an NBA franchise. There's only 30 of them. Look at the revenue generated, the national and international appeal and recognition and notoriety for your city and your state when they're good, what that can do in tourism, like, just having the recognition, like, what the marketing correlation is for having New Orleans Pelicans highlights on ESPN all day, and what that does, like what the equivalency value in marketing that would be if the city or the state wanted to buy an ad. You know what I mean? So it's like there's a reason why sports franchises are so valuable, and there's a reason why when they're good, they're even more valuable. Like to not just for the owner of that franchise, but for the city, the region, the state. So I think that's the key. And then ways to make it interesting without breaking down the game itself. Like, again, I mean, I'll keep making the correlation with the Pelicans, man, because I used to have to like find ways to be creative to bring them up. So like especially when they were bad, and it was evident they were playing for the lottery, I had like this ping pong sound effect, that would play. So like for the ping pong balls in the draft lottery. So it's like every time they lose, we kind of celebrate. We play the ping pong balls, but I'd go over the box score, and I'd inadvertently be able to talk a little about the game and the team, but more so it was the bit of playing for the draft and for the lottery. And I think so even the casual observer could laugh at the bit while the hardcore fan was still getting news and conversation about the team that they like. So again, I think it's just sometimes like finding those angles. So I don't know for you specifically if that resonates or if that sounds like it's something you could be able to do for the Predators.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't think it's maybe like tanking Pelicans level of interest. I mean, everybody saw the Cup final last year, and Broadway turned into Mardi Gras. But I also wonder if that's something. I think people are interested in the games when they're playing, maybe not the ancillary stuff. I wonder if that's when you say, okay, once every couple weeks, we're going to check in on this ancillary thing, and that's when it's worth bringing in a guest for that, some really good insight, really quick in 7-8 minutes, and then moving back to your bread and butter.
Yeah, and I would say that everybody loves a winner. So if the Predators are winning and you could get a national guest to come on your show for 7 minutes and gush about the home team, that's something I think that largely is going to be well received. So that's a good approach as well when trying to talk about that. But man, for the most part, I think that like if you know your market and you know your audience, you're going to know what they find interesting. And sometimes maybe they need a little push to understand it. Sometimes maybe you got to be a little more creative to be funny or engaging with different topics, but there's always content there. Like the thing that I can never get down with is the hey, who's on your Mount Rushmore of Tennessee football or anything like. It's like those are the generic, boring, lazy summer topics that when people don't want to do the work to dig and really build a show, they just rely on that, hoping it can carry them into football season. But man, I think that's a disservice to your audience because there's too much good potential content out there to rely on that.
At the end of the day, it's all about grinding, right? You got to put in the work and find the stuff that seems interesting and know your audience and just figure out how to present it to them.
Yeah, and I know you'll do that, man. And it's a good lesson. I'll look forward to maybe tuning in a little bit, man. Send me some links over the summer, and I'll be interested to see how it goes. Maybe we can follow up at some point during the summer and see how it's going.
Absolutely, and we're working on we've had some problems being a smaller station, finding a good outlet to host a podcast, but I've done some research on that, so we'll have shows on demand, and I love social media like you do.
Yep.
And so inspired by the podcast, I'm going to do some stuff on Facebook Live where people can talk to me on days where I'm not doing the show.
Beautiful. On
the air. So you want to come see what Will from KLR, who's up to now. You check me out on Twitter @RabWill, And our station on Facebook is WCDT Radio. There's a big orange owl in the profile picture, so you can't miss it.
Y'all check out WCDT Radio on Facebook and follow him on Twitter at RabWill, RABBWILL. Hey, man, I appreciate you so much, man. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
I appreciate it, Matt. Love the podcast. Listen every day, and love the opportunity to pick your brain.
You got it, man. That'll do it for another edition of Daily Scone. Please, please, please do me a solid. Hit the subscribe button, rate us. We appreciate it greatly. That's how we get optimized there on the search. And tell a friend that we're here every day for you. And until tomorrow, have a great day.